Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, episode 101. You are here for the next century of shows. So welcome, I'm Joel.
And I'm Ryan. And
we're super thrilled to have you back today. Hope you enjoyed our little trip down memory lane last week. That was fun, but now we're getting back to the serious business
of listing stuff.
Of lists and talking about important things that make us happy. But of course, we are super fortunate to have a group of friends who like to do this with us. Mm-hmm. And for today, we have a very special guest who has she has a very specific set of skills. And so we are going to welcome our dear friend, Miss Dayna Del Val. Woohoo! Yay!
We got a little clip of your headshot there before we saw you. That was neat.
Yeah.
Wow. Nice music.
Yes, because today, of course, we're going to be talking about the works of Miss Jane Austen. I'll drink out of my mouth, but I'll put my pinky up.
I'm very sad. I meant to get a good teacup.
Yeah, I briefly looked for a good teacup too, but then I'm like, this is not going to hold nearly enough water for me.
I was going to wear a high collar and a wraparound tie, but it turns out that's a look you can't really just manufacture out of your own closet. You got to have the goods to do that.
To be fair,
I was looking too for something to wear and had nothing.
I did, and I put on an outfit. I tested it on camera, and you really couldn't tell what I was doing. It just looked like I was in like this pink and red plaid sausage casing.
I'm sad to admit that.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, hi. There's several chins, and then I also realized because last week I dressed up for the 100th show, and then I'm like, thank you, and thank you for sending in such a lovely, nice message from you and Dr. Maz.
Wow,
that was awesome.
But yeah, then I realized I could be setting a dangerous precedent for myself where I'm going to feel like I have to dress up for every episode, and that is just not something I'm willing to do.
That could have made your previous Zardoz conversation with Dr. Mary a really interesting episode.
It could have, yes. I would have just sat here and been...
I was dressed up in Zardoz garb for that show, but that's kind of from a waist down type deal. Mm-hmm. So you guys didn't really get to experience that.
The most interesting part, for sure.
So, so today we are going to, as the music is a portent of, we are going to be talking about the cinematic adaptations of Jane Austen, brilliant author, and Dayna, tell us about your love of Jane Austen and how far back does it go? How, clearly it's deep. It's river deep and mountain high. So how?
That's a lot of pressure.
Just tell me about tell us a little bit about your love of Jane Austen and how your life, how she fits into your life, her work.
My life is richer for having Jane in it.
Correct. Yeah.
So I can tell you that my first encounter with Jane Austen was probably 23 years ago, and I rented the Colin Firth, Jennifer Ely, Pride and Prejudice from the library. Did not know who Colin Firth was, but that was quickly remedied. Mm-hmm. And then because I loved the miniseries so much, I got the book out of the library, and I was living in the top of a old apartment building, and I had a little portable washing machine and dryer, and the washing machine had stopped filling. So I had to use an attachment from my vacuum cleaner that I would hold from the faucet into the bin of the washing machine for the water to run in. Mm-hmm. And it took a long time. So I read Pride and Prejudice while I was doing laundry, basically. And what I loved about it was, having seen a version of it first, she's a complex writer, despite the fact that so much of her content is relatively frivolous and very feminine in the sort of truest sense of the word. It would have been all she would have been able to construct during the time period. And in spite of that, she's a very complex, smart writer. And I just was so grateful to have seen a version of it, because I think I would have struggled a little bit with it had I done it the opposite end.
I admit, I've never made it through a Jane Austen book ever, because it's too much. The prose is too much for me to really latch onto it in a way that I'm comfortable with.
Yeah,
it's not really a criticism. It's just a reality of it. It felt more like a failing of mine than hers, but still. Yeah,
it's a very interesting sentence structure. And I remember seeing an interview with Jennifer Ely, who, interestingly, Dr. Mary went to college with.
Nice.
And
cool.
She and I have the same birthday, not the same year. She's a little bit older than I am, but they're the same age. She and I have the same birthday. But she talked about how unbelievably complicated it was to learn those conversations, because, again, Jane Austen's sentence structure is just off kilter enough from the way that we speak today that it's almost like if you try to translate a French sentence with using the American sentence structure, it just doesn't work. So she's just a compelling writer to me. And then I sort of just dove in and have kind of never looked back. And then, she's sort of in love with everything I'm in love with. Afternoon Tea. And, she would have been a highly acerbic, way too opinionated. What's the matter with you? Why aren't you married? You're very poor. You're kind of plain. How about you don't talk anymore? Version of 3 centuries ago that I feel often like I am today. So I feel a great affinity towards her, despite not being anywhere near as clever as she is. I'm not saying to you, I liken myself to Jane Austen. I don't liken myself to her in the literary sense.
She's almost sort of like oh my gosh! Now I just was thinking about it. She has there's a Netflix special, Martin Scorsese, Fran Lebowitz, sort of a Fran Lebowitz type of writer who just has an acerbic wit, and it's a Netflix series.
No, I know who Fran Lebowitz is.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet.
I'm just saying, highly opinionated,
yes,
acerbic, and just be like, okay, you're done talking. It's my turn now. Sort of person.
and strong opinions about everyone, and almost upon their first drawn breath,
right.
Which doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't always work for me, but I certainly have that quality.
Well, it's funny because we'll get into it here in just a sec, but the lessons of her work bear out the pitfalls of that.
Yes.
So it's funny that she's like that, but she can have her mind changed, but you have to work at it. You have to. You really got to be. You got to be up to the challenge of changing your mind, which is not always the easiest thing to do, for sure. So, if I relate to Jane in any way, it is that. It is that making up your mind very, very quickly. And if you're going to be like that, you really do have to be somewhat pliable and be able to change your mind, or you become a very rigid, bitter person very quickly. So.
Yeah, I am similar to Jane Austen in that I am incredibly frivolous.
You're more like Fran Lebowitz, I think.
I'm more like but anyway, so okay, we are going to do a countdown of the top Jane Austen cinematic adaptations.
We're doing top 5 competing adaptations. Me and Dayna are going to go at it.
Okay.
10 seconds.
Just so everybody understands what we're doing. Why we're talking about every single Jane Austen book twice and sometimes 3 times.
I thought
that is why.
I didn't know that. Okay, well, that's fine.
So if Dayna said anything particularly clever in the last minute and a half, you might want to repeat it.
Well, we know for certain that I did not say anything clever.
I think we can bank on I didn't either.
All right.
Cool. All right. So we're going to start off at number 5. We will be talking about Mansfield Park. Mansfield Park, of course, the third published novel by Jane Austen. And we are going to talk about the 1999. Let's first talk about the 1999 adaptation of Mansfield Park. Dayna, tell us about the Mansfield Park of 1999.
Okay, so it's interesting because these two novels that are in the top 5 are the least, I think, celebrated of her work, fairly or unfairly. They're my least favorites.
I think fairly.
Yeah, I do too, but I know that
that's why they're here. We're only on Mansfield right now, but I think fairly these are right kind of where they belong. The rest of our list, I don't know that the quality of the novel goes with the quality of the adaptation all the time, which is an interesting thing. Yep. What both Dayna and I agree with is that the Mansfield Park's adaptations, there's a BBC one of more recent vintage, and there's that end of the height of the Jane Austen revival in the 90s version of Mansfield Park with Frances O'Connor back in 99, which are both bad kind of in a way. And I've never read it, so I really only know Mansfield Park from these movies. And I really only know the 99 one. And it really doesn't grab you somehow.
I think Fanny Price is just not that interesting a character. In some ways, she's too good. And part of what makes Jane Austen's characters so much better than almost any other women characters,
from the era, right?
She's one of the early women writers of her era. Yeah. But B, they're flawed, and that's what makes them compelling. They have to learn some lessons, which is true of life. Fanny is so good, you sort of feel that she belongs more in the Tess of the D'Urbervilles kind of era, which is a similar time period. But, women like in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, I realize that's not by Jane Austen, but she gets raped and she spends the rest of the novel saying, oh, if only I hadn't lured him in. And it's just crap like that. And I feel like Fanny is a little bit too churchy like that. I don't find her compelling. And so I don't really care about the novel or the adaptations, despite the fact that I've seen both films and I've read the book.
Right. In the novel, she gets uptight about every little thing, which doesn't endear to us very much. And in the film, there's this, although it's hinted at in the novel, is my understanding, but the film takes on the slave trade debates of the time, and it just takes it on directly, which in that sort of a story
feels weird.
It feels weird. It's not bad per se, but it feels weird. It feels tonally off with what you're supposed to be feeling when you're going through these humanity lessons. When they get geopolitical, it really does make it feel odd, which was, I think, a decision of the filmmakers at the time. So, and we're agreed that the later, what's the other year that they adapted Mansfield Park to BBC?
2007, Billy Piper was.
That's even worse.
That's such a bizarre casting.
Yeah, because even that movie doesn't even have the ambition. At least the first one's trying for something, and you get a sense of it even if you don't dig it. This movie's just like it's a fastest 90 minutes, and there's a few 90-minute adaptations on here, but it's the fastest 90 minutes. It feels like the greatest hits of the story performed by a really bad group of players, and they're not all bad. So Billy Piper's not the best, but she has her utility too. She's not a terrible actor. She's sort of terrible in this type of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. She clearly it was riding high off her, the success.
She was wanting to do something different.
Yeah,
I sympathize
coming off
with
of Doctor Who, and she had some clout and came on, and
she's not good in it. But there's plenty of people who should be good in it. They also aren't great in it. So it's,
the guy who plays the father is a big time legitimate actor. I can't tell you for $1 million or one what his name is.
I know exactly what you're talking about, but it's not coming to me right now.
I'll never know it. But
anyway, it doesn't. In this case, it doesn't matter. We got plenty of. Joel's going to have to look up tons of actors for us here.
What's the name of the father? Is it Sir Thomas Bartram?
Yes.
That's Douglas Hodge. But that 2007 version also featured James Darcy. Haley Atwell was in that.
Yeah, exactly. She's
Rory
great.
Kinnear was in it. Lots. I mean, it was
She would have made a decent enough Fanny, I guess. She doesn't look the part, but she at least is an actor who can do the job.
Absolutely. When I think about that version, I think about lighting. I feel like that whole thing was like how sometimes movies feel like they're all around, hey, we can do this super cool effect on the computer. That film feels like, hey, we could do this super moody lighting. The only scene I ever think about, I think about her running down the stairs, which always feels weird, and the scene where they're doing the kind of pantomime theater in that big space, and the lighting is all weird, and it just feels like somebody thought, oh, it's awesome lighting. And that does not make for an interesting film to me.
So is would that be the biggest criticism though against Mansfield Park as a story would be that Fanny's a little bit well that and
the structure is not the same. The tension doesn't come from the same place as a lot of these others, where you really are wanting to know. There really is some core relationship at the center of the thing that you get invested in one way or another. That happens in Mansfield Park, but to my feeling, and again, I've only seen the films, but to my feeling, that story feels inevitable, and because it does, it becomes a secondary thing. And to me, that's the whole ball. That's why I come to these,
Yeah.
There's various reasons, but that's the main reason. You really do invest in people, and I don't have a problem with Fanny. I think she's cool, but it becomes not about that. It becomes about all the side stuff, and that stuff isn't super interesting in Mansfield Park either. The scandal of the play, for example, like to me as a modern audience, that meant something in the time. So I don't mean to diss on it, but neither of these versions, they both tackle that, and neither of them managed to pull off communicating what exactly that is to us in a way. And it's a challenge. If it wasn't, they wouldn't both struggled with it, but they do. And that's a side story. It's a side act in the play, but it's a big deal in that book. And I still don't really get it.
I don't feel like it's explained in the book either.
It's something from that time that that everyone would have understood and that we just kind of don't.
Right.
And the adaptations should be doing the work for us, and they aren't. It's comedic and fun. Both those sequences are fun in both of them, I think. But what the issue is around it, I don't understand. So it's always been a little weird. But we shouldn't spend too much time on those. We want to talk briefly.
The other one that on number 5 is Northanger Abbey. Yeah, which was another adaptation that and ITV did a version of it.
Well, and it's important to say, because we're going to bring his name up a lot, but Andrew Davies adapted this for the screen, and do you know Dayna, or do you know Joel? When in her writing did this happen? Was it early, and she used a pen name when it was released? When did she write it?
It was 1817, and
that's the year she died.
Let's see. It was coming of age novels. It was completed in 1803, the first of Austen's novels completed in full. So actually,
it was the first.
But it was published posthumously.
Right.
It was published with Persuasion after she died.
Gotcha.
I have not read Northanger Abbey, but the thing that I know is true about it is that so Jane Austen had access to her father's library at the first house that they lived in. So he was a minister, they lived in a somewhat rural part of England, but he had a really extensive library because he had a kind of a boys' school, and they boarded with them and all of this stuff. And for whatever reason, he allowed both Jane and Cassandra complete access to his library. So she was super well read. Mm-hmm. And sort of thriller books were a huge thing of the time. They were
Gothic thriller books. We were losing your audio there for a second. So Gothic thrillers, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So girls were not really encouraged to read them because they would faint and it would cause their hearts to palpitate and, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
Mhm.
So in many ways, it's a play on the fact that she had experienced that, and that as a family, they sort of were like early, let's sit around the fire and tell ghost stories kinds of people. Right. And so I just don't care about it at all. Don't care about it. Can hardly even talk about it much because I love
Northanger Abbey, the adaptation. I think it's really, really, actually, I think it's kind of special, although I agree with what you're saying about the story. Compared to her other stories, the plot is linear and just it's very simple, and the girl is exceedingly simple in it, although I find her sort of adorable. It helps that in Northanger Abbey, the adaptation from 2008, 2007, 2009, somewhere in there, was Felicity Jones's first job, basically first acting job out of college. And Felicity Jones is spectacular, and she's really, really good in Northanger Abbey. She has this thing she does, and I have a big crush on her, so forgive me if I say this wrong, but a thing she does that's this really neat trick, and she still does it, although she uses it in all these weird and interesting ways. She's got, Felicity's two things to me is she lets her eyes go blank and she sticks her front teeth out. Her natural expression is kind of this sort of buck tooth blank look. And, and whether it's Rogue One or whether it's the Stephen Hawking thing or whatever it is, she's got this look where when the other character's doing something, and especially if they're doing something dubious, she just lets it all goes away, and you have to be like, what's she thinking about? Like, it's really mysterious and awesome. And in this case, she utilizes it as this girl just, what is she thinking about? She doesn't even know what she's thinking about. Like, it's kind of perfect. Mm-hmm. And I wish that adaptation, although we hate to talk about what we wish things were instead of what they are, but it's almost kind of brilliant. If they'd have had, Davies is a brilliant adapter of Jane because he gets to the heart of things and he really knows how to pick stuff when he's got to abbreviate. Mm-hmm. And he just really judicious and very smart about what he does. But what he doesn't do that some of the other writers here will do is he absolutely does not have the balls to just make up his own scene, do his own thing. That almost never happens in any of his stuff. I really think if this girl's carried away by these Gothic novels, by these ghost stories, she gets herself into real trouble and gets in the way of her own happiness because of it. I wish more was made of her investigation when she gets to the Abbey. I think her coming out in society way too young for what any of us should be comfortable with as a modern audience. I think that's all played rather brilliantly, so I don't change any of that. But I do wish I wish the film would flirt with us a little bit with what's going on in her head so that we almost buy into it a little bit before it kind of all comes crashing down. And it ends very abruptly. But other than that, Northanger Abbey, while like I said in our notes to each other, it's a slight novel for sure. But that adaptation compared to these Mansfield Park adaptations, which is probably a better novel in most measurable ways, that adaptation is fantastic. It's really, really a good version of Northanger Abbey. So at least I can go to the bat for it in that way.
Yeah. Also an early one of the early appearances by Carey Mulligan in that. Yeah.
Who's great in it. And everybody's really great in it, but Mulligan's really great in it. Mulligan, if she were just a few years younger in that, would have had the lead in that. Yeah. As it is, she plays her sort of adopted friend in Bath, where they all get in so much trouble in Bath, don't they, Dayna?
It's so naughty.
Bath,
so
very scandalous.
She's her friend that sort of adopts her and tries to manipulate her in Bath. And our hero is even though she's confused and all these things, she's very honorable and she kind of comes through. Awesome. I think.
So
I'm truly heartbroken when she thinks she's lost it all and she kind of has to tell her mom. I'm actually very affected by that every time I see it. So I really think Northanger is pretty cool. I think her relationship with her siblings and stuff like endears us to her in a way. But I also think Felicity's magic. And sometimes you get somebody that really is, you know what I mean, special, and they do. There's more of it than what's there. And I think that's cool too. So
sure. All right, very cool. So let's move on to the next one on our list, which I mentioned. Northanger Abbey was published with this one posthumously, is Persuasion.
Boy, me and Dana really love Persuasion. I have to say, if this was a list of novels, right, this would be a lot higher.
Oh, absolutely. It's my favorite of her story.
It's my favorite too. So it's weird that it's here at 4, but I think these adaptations are both challenged in a way. I think it's so if the list is about that, they're both great too. So they're not the Mansfield Park adaptations. They're both awesome.
Right. No,
but in kind of different ways. So I don't know. When were we starting out with, Joel?
We're starting out with yours, the 1995 one by
Roger Michell.
Mm-hmm.
I love this movie. This was the second Jane Austen thing I'd ever experienced. The first was Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. And this, this is the same by the same people or something, which it isn't, but it's Jane Austen. So I watched it and I just thought it was fantastic.
Kieran Hines is spectacular in it. Kieran Hines is spectacular in it.
Yeah, he is. So let's just quick what it is, because not a lot of people, even people who know a lot of these, this is one they may not know as well. Persuasion's a story about this young woman who was at a young age kind of fell in love with a guy who was sort of deemed by her family members and her advisors as to not be particularly worthy of her. But she was in love with him, and she sort of regretted turning down his proposal all these years. And he comes back into her life as a gallant, accomplished sea captain.
Yeah.
And at a time when she's really down and her family is really going through tough times. So it really is that all this happens before the thing even starts. And then, we're thrown into this with her moving out of her childhood home, her mother's home, they keep referring to it as in both adaptations. And it's just about her wishing, really, because she doesn't do a whole lot and she's never been good at this, and this is part of why she's in this predicament. She doesn't do a whole lot to get back in his graces, or she doesn't scheme or do really anything to get what she wants. But every other occasion, when she's asked to do something, she does exactly the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we slowly, fall in love with her, just the way I'm sure he did, slowly, but over the course of the thing, by the end, you really desperately want things to work out for her. And the thing I love about Roger Michell's version, first of all, I love Amanda Root, who plays Anne in it, the main character. I just think she's such a common and approachable person, and I just find that works marvelously. There's this wonderful sequence where all the members of her sister's family all confide in her about all their complaints, and it just kind of goes from one to the next to the next to the next, and she doesn't say anything. She literally says nothing in that entire sequence. She just sits there, and they all just do their thing. That's the kind of person we're talking about. We all know people like that, and there's no knock on people for being that way, but it's just awesome. There's other things in it cinematically that I love too. Like that sequence is one. The whole thing is told, and the next version, it's sort of a contrast with that, because the next version is more like the novel. It's structured where your points of view are a little more spread out. Roger Michell's Persuasion is only from Anne's point of view. You're only experiencing something if she's experiencing it. And when she overhears something, you barely overhear it. You overhear it, but you overhear it in a weird way where you're not sure what you really heard. That tightness on that one character, while we miss some really cool things from the book, I suspect, from watching the other adaptation, really works marvelously cinematically. And I don't know, what's the other things I like about it? I guess we'll let that suffice, but that's a mechanism, a cinematic mechanism that I really, really like. Mm-hmm. The other, I guess, is there's a famous letter that she reads at the end. And even the reading of the letter it's, how sometimes when you read a letter in a movie, it's read by the person who wrote the letter. And sometimes when you read a letter in a movie, it's read in voiceover by the person reading the letter. This letter is read by both of them, and there's times where she's reading it that she's speeding up and we're not catching what he's saying. It's how you read a letter, especially if you're really excited about something. You know what I mean? Well, I adore that sort of artistic choice, and the early version of Persuasion is full of that stuff.
You know what that version of the novel does, I think, brilliantly, is it really it builds energy in much more likely ways of Jane Austen's actual era. Mm-hmm. So I really love the new version as well, in part because I think Rupert Henry Jones is a really interesting Captain Wentworth, and I like Sally Hawkins as Anne.
Me too.
She's got some odd ticks in that character, but
well, Sally Hawkins is an odd tick of an actor, so she's actually excessively restrained as Anne in that version from what I'm used to from her. But she's still a little bit of a twitchy person. I get what you're saying.
But there's a lot of physicality in that movie. She does a huge amount of running, and I will say, I was just in Bath almost exactly a year ago. I was not running in no corset and in the 21st century.
On the cobblestones.
No way is she literally running.
The climax of the movie, not to spoil everything, is literally her sprinting from one side of town to the other.
Yes.
And then back as soon as she finds out a certain amount of information.
Somehow and Captain Wentworth is like a time traveler in that one. He literally leaves the house, and she leaves the house 3 seconds later, and he's on the other side of Bath. So I don't know. That's a weird edit.
He's like Jason Voorhees in any horror movie where everyone's running and the killer's just walking, and then it's somehow like ahead of them and behind a tree.
Also, Rupert Henry Jones gets the benefit of the extra scenes that my version of Persuasion doesn't have. There's this wonderful scene where him and his friend there's a couple of them, but there's one in particular in Lyme on that stone dock thing. Yeah. It's in both movies, featured famously in both films.
Yep.
Where Joseph Mulway plays his friend in the one we're talking about, the later one, and that conversation, it's very clever. The earlier Persuasion finds ways to take the bits of that conversation and spread it throughout the other movie because they want to have that language and those lessons be part of that. But that you miss that the perspective of that character. I think Kieran is brilliant in the first one, which is why I think it works anyway, because I think I think Henry Jones is a very closed off actor, and he's very kind of a mysterious guy, and I like that, but he doesn't share much with us. Kieran, everything he's going through in every scene, you're right there with it. And it's, so you get, even though you have none of his perspective until finally halfway through the movie, they first look each other in the eye. The first half of the movie, they don't even look at each other.
No,
it's painful. It's agony.
Yeah, but that goes back to my point, which is I think the first version really keeps with at least what we believe that era to have been about, which is I will say nothing and somehow I will convey everything. Or I will run a marathon by reading this letter, as opposed to I will run the hills of Bath, which is just not, it's just not possible. So the agony of nothing happening in the first film, I think really depicts the novel brilliantly. You know, Eddie Izzard's whole bit about arranging matches, you know, that sketch. Maz and I joke about that all the time because on one hand, I sort of adore arranging matches films. I mean, Jane Austen is an enormous arranging matches writer. Because that was her experience. And
I call them the let's marry the lords and ladies stories. It's not always the case, but they often are, you know.
Yes. You know, so nothing
and we're all like sheepdogs who just want to get everybody together, and we're not satisfied when they go into different rooms or something. You know, it's true.
You can't keep track of them all. But yeah, Kieran Hines' eyes tell you more than any 4-page monologue ever could.
He's not an actor who has played a lot of romantic leads, and he just is stunning in that movie. Although that's no offense to Rupert, who does it differently and is also really, really awesome.
Well, I think the big difference is Kieran Hines is not a traditionally stunning man. And
well, right. And Amanda Root, we've talked about Hawkins, but Amanda Root also you get why she's, even amongst her sisters who are no great shakes, she's kind of considered the plain sensible one.
Yeah.
And to me, that's crazy. They're all beautiful. They're all movie stars basically, but it does play better, I think, in the first movie than the second one, but I don't know if that matters so much in the end. I will say that the Sister Mary, I'll just give a shout out to them. We got to move on because we've got too many movies to talk about, but Sister Mary is played by the brilliant Sophie Thompson in the older one.
Oh, yes.
And and I got to talk about fathers too, I guess, because Mary is really her father's daughter.
Yeah. And
the two Marys are very much their father's daughter, and the fathers couldn't be more different. If we're going to talk about a contrast, Corin Redgrave, who plays Anne's father in the earlier Persuasion, Roger Michell version, is he's this unaccountable, foppish sort of fashionista. He's just this worthless person with no practical skill, whatever. His goodbye to her is he does this, and that's it. And then he kind of goes on into his carriage. First of all, you immediately get why they're in the situation they're in with him. He's ridiculous.
Yep.
But he's a much more pitiable and sympathetic character than the latter one. Because you really feel like he's just a prisoner to his own issues.
He's a product of having been wealthy and born into the landed gentry. Right. He's a baronet. Right. He has no idea that you would need to be accountable to your budget. His
behavior and the things he says and the things he takes issue with are very powerful because he's the head of this family who, even without money, still there's consequences for all of them based on what he does or doesn't do. Yeah. Which is hard because the way they, even in the opening bits, are just everybody carefully trying to convince him that renting his property is his own idea and that, all that it's just really, really well done. And the other one is played by Anthony Head, who's a really good actor. But Anthony, right?
Yep.
He just runs right at it. He's just sort of a mean jerk.
Yep.
And he's not the worst person in the world or anything, but he's really frustrated with his situation and he just takes it out on all of them. Mm-hmm. Sophie Thompson, daughter of Corin Redgrave, is this, I'm so ill all the time. She's this drama queen and it's very entertaining and fun, even when it's really inconvenient in the story. Amanda Hale in the Hawkins version, she's really an awful person, and it's
really unlikable.
Amanda Hale is too. She reminds me very much of our own Sarah Ross in her sort of the way, her style of doing stuff and her sort of just command of language. I love everything she's in. And this is kind of relatively small part, but it's just really interesting. It makes that second version a lot darker. The second version doesn't stop to have a lot of fun. We actually break into tears more often. We actually come to a boil more often. That can be cathartic. So that's a feather in its cap, but it's still a kind of weird difference between the two.
Yeah,
all right.
Okay.
No, if you want to watch Amanda Hale, it'll be really awesome. Watch the White Princess miniseries. She's spectacularely good. She's a force of nature in it. It's just stunning to me.
All right.
So, good actor.
Okay.
Sophie Thompson's a great actor too, but she's cast appropriately in this rather comedic version of the woman, and that it's softer, and we're like, oh, she's just that way, as opposed to
more like her Emma character,
right? But not as annoying as that, but nowhere near as sweet as that to redeem her either.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah. So, but not all that different.
Speaking of matchmaker movie or matchmaker stories, making a match and marrying all the lords and ladies, and also just right off of what Dayna just said. Next up, number 3 movie is Emma, adaptations of Emma, of which there are a few.
Yes.
So let's start with the 96 Gwyneth Paltrow Emma, where that was really was that sort of Gwyneth's introduction to the to most of us. Is that where does that fall in her?
It was certainly, I think, her first major role, at least that I can remember.
That wasn't in a contemporary romancy comedy kind of whatever. She'd done a couple of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Seven was before that, and yeah, she had done a few things.
She was a named person, but
yeah,
but she hadn't carried a film.
No, and she's this sort of Texas lady who, it's like it's a weird mix for her to be thrown into a British film with all these British people. Mm-hmm.
And she can pretty roundly convince the world she might be from England. Maz and I have had no fewer than 3 conversations about the fact that she is not English, she's American.
Right. And exactly. And this version of Emma is directed by an American as well, Doug McGrath, who, so that's interesting. There's an American bent to it, even though it's a super English movie.
Well, there's also a super Miramax bent to it. I mean, it feels very packaged the way them at their high point certainly was.
Ewan McGregor says of it that he wished it's the only movie that he's ever done that he wishes he hadn't done. And he said it's not a bad movie. Wars? Ewan McGregor.
Well, yeah, he got to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's not going to have any problem with that.
He makes the point that he's been in worse movies. He thinks the movie turned out rather well, but he sees himself in it, and he just sees a guy who did it for all these non-story related, actor related reasons. He did it for all these career reasons, and he just sees himself as being this sort of empty character.
Yeah. Which if they'd given him better hair, even it might have helped. He has such ridiculous hair in that. It is
ridiculous.
He even says, "I was wearing the world's worst wig."
Yeah, it looks like something from a small college. I mean, like we might have worn one of those in college, and felt kind of lucky about it.
But it's a lovely adaptation. It's got this storybook feel to it. It has an Academy Award-winning score by Rachel Portman, which is
it's a beautiful score.
Adorable, beautiful music.
Beautiful opening. That illustration of
that's a Douglas McGrath.
I love
staple. That's in all of his films.
Beautiful.
But
I think there's a lot about this film to recommend. I think that it does a really good job with Emma and Mr. Knightley. First of all, we should be uncomfortable with that age gap. They're 21 years apart. He's literally known her since birth. I mean, it's kind of a Michael Douglas, Catherine Zeta-Jones moment where you just feel a little creepy when they do come together. But
a little bit. But what although he's an old man for kind of the era, but he's still young enough to be her brother. Or her father's son, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes.
I get what you're saying, but to me, a 40-year-old and a 20-year-old is like, I just look out the window and I can see that everywhere. So I don't really object to that. I do get a little nervous when they send the teenagers out on the town and we're all, and it's late 20-year-old people hitting on them. Like, that's creepy to me, but
but I'm just saying, I think this version, I think Jeremy Northam is really well cast as Mr. Knightley. I agree. I think he has the gravitas of the role that his character plays. I think he has the wit. I think he's got that great spark in his eyes that, recognizes when things are ridiculous, recognizes how absolutely ridiculous Emma's dad is, but is never, ever, ever mean-spirited to him.
Right.
Recognizes how preposterous Mrs. Elton is. There's so many preposterous.
Mrs. Elton narrates the 96 version of it, which is a fun choice. Just worth mentioning.
And
it's a surprise. I mean, it's not really a surprise if you know Juliet Stevenson's voice, which I do. Yep. But you don't find out that's who's narrating it until she literally turns to the camera and starts talking to you at the end of the movie.
That's right. It's an interesting turn.
She's clever.
She's really spectacular in that version, because talk about another just
Juliet is all-time good actor.
It's a bonkers. The whole cast is pretty bonkers in that 96 one, considering what everyone's gone on to do with, Tony Nevertheless, Ryan prefers the 2009 miniseries version of it. Let me find it here. A 4-part BBC miniseries.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons I prefer it, but the strange thing is that I prefer it for the reason Dayna doesn't really like it or won't tolerate it much, which is the main actor in it. I think is the best ever screen Emma that we've had. I think kind of by a long shot she is. We require Emma to be like we talked about Kieran being. She really has to, that actor, and Gwyneth does a pretty good job of this, but Romola Garai shares everything with us. She shares everything with us. It's a little broad at times, perhaps. It goes a little too far.
She's a stage actor.
Right. But it's still what's needed for that character, really desperately needed for her, that we're always tracking her reactions to things that are happening, whether she's being yelled at or whether she's being flirted with or whatever the hell is happening in the room. Other people are fighting near her, she just lets us in on that brilliantly. She's a little old for the role. Mm. She's in her early 30s, I think, when she played that role. So it's a bit of a Hamlet. Oh yeah. She'd given in tons of stuff before that. It's a bit of a Hamlet type performance, but that works too, because she really is to the more mature actor approaching this material. That's a little tricky, and a character that really is tough to stick with and be sympathetic with all the way through. There are other things that are great about it besides Romola, but first of all, it's a 4-part, just like the original Pride that Dayna talked about. It's basically the full novel. They don't really have to leave anything out when they have 4 hours. No. So you really do get structurally the things they've had to edit. Characters that have been combined in shorter versions they're all there for you. Yep. You follow all the relationships. The extended families don't just appear and say a couple things. Their influence and their everything, Michael Gambon as her father too is, compared to all other versions of Emma, plays this part like a man who has lost what is dearest to him and isn't just some quirky, weird guy. He is terrified of everything genuinely.
Yes.
He plays it with charm and everything. And he understands, the actor's really brilliant. So he understands the humor, but he plays it with such pathos, and the film allows the time for that to be there in such a wonderful way. And it really is the only version of that character that I truly love that's in a screen version.
I agree with you. I just rewatched it this week and had a much softer reviewing of it. I don't particularly like her, but I think she's very good as Emma. I just don't like her as an actress, and I can't exactly tell you why. Who cares?
I love her.
Yeah, I know. What's the World War II movie? Where Saoirse Ronan plays her as a young girl, and then she plays her as
Atonement.
Yeah, I so despised Atonement that it kind of ruined her for the rest.
Well, okay. Atonement's tough as a movie. Talk about a movie adaptation. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
And that person, this particularly older version of that character, bears the brunt of all of the challenges of it, essentially.
I agree completely. It's not.
It all basically falls at her doorstep. But we don't want to get sidetracked.
I know.
Johnny Lee Miller, you want to say anything about him? He's pretty great, isn't he?
You know what? Here's what I like about him. I don't think
he's an earlier, less clever version of the character, but
he's much more robust. He's constantly sort of tripping down the lane. And one thing I noticed that I really loved is that walk he does from sort of the hedge into their house. She's always at the window, and you always see him coming way before she does. I loved that.
That's neat
technique. I thought it really worked for how often he was choosing to enter into her world. I thought there were some very smart, subtle directorial choices to that version.
And they had the benefit of time. The Emma has 12 endings. It's got 12 little things it's got to resolve, and all the short version of Emma have to do it in just a couple minutes.
Yeah.
This movie just says the last 20 minutes is going to be this stuff, and it's great. You get all of it, and you feel fulfilled by each and every successive payoff, which is the other thing I think the others don't have going. Particularly the 2021, which is like the ending is like it's like a highlight reel of what the ending's supposed to be. You know, it's barely there. It's like the guys who made the trailer cut the ending of the movie. And I guess I know Emma pretty well. I've seen 4 versions of it. So when I watch that, I'm like, no, you got to say this, and then you got to say that. And it's like, this is too fast.
Right.
This is the part you can't screw up, you guys. You know, you've already kind of screwed everything up a little bit, but this, if you just nail this, I'm going to go, yay, you know, I'm still going to be happy.
Absolutely. Again,
they kind of didn't manage that. So
the newest version felt to me again like what somebody said was, we have an incredible costumer and an unbelievable scenic painter.
Right.
Let's build the script around that because
the time to take all these wild tracking shots around, and I mean, it's really beautifully made.
Visually, it's stunning, and it's so intense in its color and its palette, which is really interesting. But the whole thing feels like everything else is in service to that, which is, you know, interesting but not compelling. And I kind of cannot for the life of me figure out what they did with Knightley. And he wasn't bad if you just pretend like the novel never existed. And so
those young actors are pretty much okay, but they all suffer by comparison, unfortunately. And that's at this point, when you're making this movie every 10 years, I mean, you got to do something new each time, and just making the costuming prettier and the landscaping
greener,
you know, it's like, that's not enough. You really got to have your own take on the story. And their take on the story was, this is what happens in the story.
No, just to interject here, we're talking about the 2020 version, this version that just came out, that was directed by Autumn de Wilde. So,
a woman, which I loved.
And adapted by a woman, right?
Yes, Eleanor Catton.
I just don't know how.
It is weird, you know, that
Anna Taylor-Joy too, who's the hottest actor on the planet. She, you know, she's a good actor, but she's just not a very good Emma. She is in a lot of ways, because you believe her impracticality and you believe her, but she's like Penry Jones. She's this closed off thing. Yeah. And Emma has to be open. She just has to be.
Yes. Because she's so confident in her own ability when she has no cause to be. What I thought the new version felt like would be if they made a contemporary version of Emma, and Emma was a freshman in high school. Well, you're not going to have Emma's civics teacher be Mr. Knightley. You're going to have a senior be Mr. Knightley.
Right.
And that's what it felt like to me. Otherwise, we're talking about pedophilia.
Yeah.
Right. Well, speaking of putting Emma in a high school,
why don't we?
I think we do have to talk about Clueless.
Well, we have to mention it. I don't know what there is to talk about so much, but
I think we have to talk about that. It's a pretty darn good adaptation. What just happened? Pretty darn good adaptation. Oh, I disappeared there. Did I disappear?
Not to us.
Okay, good. Something happened and my screen went blank. We have to, it's a pretty darn good adaptation of Emma. In terms of hitting those beats.
It is. Jane Austen's plots are great. They are really, really good. Even in Northanger, even in her simplest story, her plot mechanisms are fantastic. They work on you in all the right ways almost every time in almost every adaptation. So I just feel confident saying that, even though I haven't read this stuff. That that's part of what I'm in love with. In the movies, each and every one of them is just kind of how they move and meander about. And that is in Clueless completely. That part works brilliantly. But you do, by modernizing it, you do sort of make it a little easier on yourself in a lot of key ways, even though, because you really are telling your own story, you're just sort of, like just Lion King is Hamlet, Clueless is Emma. It's like that. It's not exactly a perfect remake of it or anything. Sure. It misses a lot of the point of it. Yeah. Not all of it. It gets the big point of it, but it misses a lot of the little points, which I think are kind of important. So, but Clueless is great. Yeah. Clueless is really great. A movie of that type from that era, I shouldn't like at all. And the fact that I even like it moderately shows you that it's really awesome.
She's a great lead. She really, Alicia Silverstone carries that very, very well. And
it's perfect role for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
sometimes that happens. You get the perfect role. And then you spend the rest of your life looking for it again, and you never find it. In the case of Alicia,
and that's why I eschewed Hollywood. I didn't want to get cast in the perfect role too soon, and then be on a quest. So I just said, no, everyone will just have to miss my perfect role.
And you know what? It was very brave of you.
I know the world is sadder for it. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, they are, but I mean, it's brave of you to choose that. All right, so let's move on to our number two. Our number two story that we're going to talk about, the adaptations of, is Sense and Sensibility.
Woo!
A little story that's featured a couple little movies that have been popular.
Really, only unless we go back, we're talking about our adulthood. Basically, all these movies exist. There are versions of these going back and back. Mm-hmm. But I really think Sense and Sensibility and modern Jane Austen adaptations weren't really cracked until who's the producer? I can't remember her name. Who kind of owned this property and just willed it into being. And her idea to have
Rebecca Eaton?
No, Rebecca Eaton's just the public television Boston lady who edits everything for America. I'm not a fan of hers.
Read her book. It's incredibly interesting.
Is it?
Yeah, it was. I was really interesting.
Did she explain why she edits out everything racy that was okay for European audiences, but not okay for us?
Because
unless she's got a whole chapter that justifies her censorship, I'm not reading her book.
All I'll say is in Europe, you pay a flat TV tax, and then whatever plays is what plays. In America, they need funders, and funders tend to be conservative. I will say, as a nonprofit leader, I'm right with her. I totally get it. It's crummy, but I get it.
Yeah. Well, my tax money pays her salary, so she needs to do what I want more often. That's what I'm saying.
I'll send that along.
And I'm not a donor at all, and I never will be.
I'm carrying the weight for both Ryan and Rebecca.
I can just watch these on BBC on the internet. I don't need you for anything, Rebecca. All right, anyway. Look, she's an accomplished lady. I don't mean to. I'm teasing a little bit here. I do have a legitimate beef, but I don't really hate her. I don't really hate her. She's
I'm gonna put a time right here. Hi, bud. What do you need?
Snack.
You want to say? Okay. You want to say hi real quick?
Hey.
See.
Hey.
Hey, you're a floating head. Hi, Ben.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Go
I
have a snack.
gotta help him real quick, and then I'll be right back.
Thanks.
We're here.
Now, I can look up who produced Sense and Sensibility now.
You should go to the bathroom.
It's going pretty good, huh, Dana?
Yeah.
The trick during these breaks is to not say anything about the content of the show.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Don't keep talking because it won't. I am going to look this up because it's going to drive me crazy. That's my typing right next to my microphone.
No, it's good. Suddenly it sounds like some kind of a Doogie Howser ending. Remember when Doogie Howser's keys made the sound as he was making his little blog?
Today, even though Dana was kind of mean to me on the show, I really feel like
I learned that it's okay.
Oh my goodness.
I wish Joel was bringing me a snacky.
Lindsay Doran.
Couldn't have gotten that name for $100,000 either.
I should have got it. Really, the 95 Sense and Sensibility is because of her. That's the reason we got a big screen. And I'll say this again.
Partnered with Emma Thompson somehow?
She found Emma in her search to get this made, and then because they connected on what she thought was important from the material, she took somebody who had only written sketch comedy and let her adapt this big Hollywood movie.
It's so genius.
And that was all. I need to say all this again, so let's not get into it.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was a major leap of faith that paid off in this incredible way. So
yeah. Stop, Lil. Go lie down. But way to come in on the break. Good job. Good timing.
Who's that?
It's my dog.
Oh, yeah. I'm impressed that they even were, I guess dogs don't care as much. Cats seem to know when these Zoom cameras turn
for
on.
Sure. Yeah.
They just know something's happening, and then they, in a way, dogs like, who are you talking to? Oh, what's that? What's out the window? I'm hungry. They just can't. But cats are like, something's changed.
Something's changed, and I must disrupt it.
Something's changed in here, and I'm going, exactly, I need to be involved somehow. I don't care how. And then they do somehow. I think that's kind of weird.
I will walk like this.
No cats here, though.
No cats.
Okay. Thanks for letting me take that little break.
No
That
problem.
was unreasonable
We're
thought.
set. We're frozen in place.
Yep, we said nothing of interest.
Nope.
Okay.
I just kept shitting on Rebecca Eaton the whole time. That's all that's happened since you've been gone.
All right. All right. So we are back. I had to help my son there for that edit.
That's okay. That happens, everybody, right?
Yep.
We all have sons. I don't, but
I do. I can't help him during a short edit,
you
but
don't. Yeah, you don't. You don't necessarily need to stop and help him get a snack.
anyway, Sense and
No,
Sensibility. I apologize
this is
first to
rotten
Miss
attack,
Eaton for
though.
being mean to her, but like I said, I have legit complaints, but I'm not really mad at her. Well, the person I wanted to give the credit to, though, who is not her, is Lindsay Doran. I looked her up during the break.
thank goodness for the break.
Yeah, Lindsay, because Lindsay is not, we give the credit to the 95, big screen adaptation of Sense and Sensibility to a lot of people. It typically does not go to her. And typically, we've talked about it on the show all the time, the producers 85% of the time don't deserve any of the credit. They get all the money. They don't do anything except cause problems.
Yeah.
Lindsay Doran wanted to do this story. And when Sidney Pollack came on board, he was like, well, yeah, but shouldn't we do this one or that one? She's like, no, Sense and Sensibility. She's had this all worked out. And her passion that brought it into being. The most amazing thing she did was, for whatever reason, they tell the story on the DVD, and the details, as always, are a little lost to me, but she got connected with who was a pretty famous sketch comedy writer and performer, former Cambridge student, Emma Thompson, and saw her parodies basically of this sort of thing on this TV show in England, and thought, wow, she's just making this stuff up. Like, she really gets this stuff. So she had this kind of talk with her, and they shared their passion on this. Even Emma was like, well, maybe shouldn't we do? And Lindsay's like, no, Sense and Sensibility. It's going to be Sense and Sensibility. All right, let's just get this straight. That's what it's going to be. Okay, no more. I get that you love this or that or whatever. I don't care. Shouldn't it be Emma? Emma's a little easier for audiences. No. And Emma Thompson took Sense and Sensibility and went away and adapted it into this 7,000 page film script or whatever that everybody sort of had a go at. And she kind of just writing away. And obviously she got cast ultimately in the interim. She became something of a movie star, particularly in England, but even a little bit over here. And, but I think what really made her a star, honestly, was Sense and Sensibility. She plays Eleanor, one of these sort of, I don't know what to call them. They're like divorced sisters, the ladies of the family who are sort of, it's so harsh what happens to them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I get that's the point of the story, so I don't mean to make a big deal of it. It's a hard thing even to relate to in the story. Their stepbrother is a pretty nice enough guy, and he makes this vow to take care of them financially on his father's deathbed. You really think he's going to do it, and he sort of lets himself get talked out of it.
Not sort of. Totally.
Well, he completely gets talked. Like he gets talked out of every penny of it, virtually.
He basically leaves his three stepsisters and his stepmother absolutely penniless,
at the mercy of others non-family members' charity, even though he has plenty,
more than enough
to take care of them.
Yes.
It's
interesting because Norland, the family estate in Sense and Sensibility, is one of the few attached to a woman that is in good shape.
Right.
I mean, so is Hartfield and Emma, but she's not yet left on her own because her father's still living.
Right.
So these women actually could have been in perfectly fine shape. They may not have gotten to stay in the family house, but they would have had other places they could have gone. Right. And he really does just shove them. Well, his wife shoves them right out the door. Yeah. And they are totally dependent on the kindness of virtual strangers. They go to a cousin's house, but they've never even met.
Yeah, they're just lucky that they came along. Oh, how lucky they are, because one of their lives takes a slight turn for the worse, but everybody else, once things get rolling, are much, much better off where they end up in this cottage, sorting through things and sort of finding themselves. Eleanor is a very, we talked about Anne earlier. She's a very reserved, very unexpressive, sort of responsible older sister. I think we all know that character too. Her younger sister, Marianne, is an extremely like modern woman. She's this, people talk, people in the novel, people in the film complain about her as being impractical. She's this, she's that, but there's nothing that she does in that today, if she'd do it, it would be any problem at all. There are these rules of propriety that she doesn't always follow.
She gets in a barouche, Ryan. Don't pretend that's not a big deal.
What's a barouche?
It's a carriage.
Oh, right. She rides too fast in a carriage.
Go off on their own in a carriage, and everyone is like, "Well, when will they be married?" Because
they must be getting married, or this would not be happening.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Or she's a wanton woman.
She gets in a barouche.
Fallen.
I love Marianne. She is sort of impractical, especially given their situation. But I just don't want her to get a short shift. She believes in love in these heightened ways. She believes in music and poetry and all these wonderful things that we all believe in as so-called artists, at one time or another. And I just feel like that's really not so bad. And she falls in love with this guy and she wants to go on a carriage ride with him. She doesn't make out with him or anything.
She's also 17.
Exactly.
That was even young then.
Exactly. And the great Colonel Brandon, their new neighbor where they move, he even says, Eleanor says, well, the sooner she becomes acquainted with the ways of the world, the better. And he has that great, don't wish it.
Yep.
You don't want, you say that but you don't want that. I've seen it and it is no good. That's a wonderful moment in the story. It lands so much of what is said by Austen through these characters in this version of Sense and Sensibility, even stuff that Austen didn't write, that Emma Thompson wrote. The brilliance of this version, and this is probably Ang Lee's doing because he's a really brilliant at this. If you watch his Hong Kong films that come before this, the same thing happens. Somebody says something and the film takes real time to make sure you see it stick with the other person in the room who's not saying anything. Okay, I'm going to name just a couple of my favorites. The first one is Emma Thompson wrote. It's not in the book. There's a version of it, but Emma Thompson wrote this perfect way of saying it. I swear that if I wasn't silenced because of propriety, I could have shown evidence of a broken heart even for you. Mm-hmm. For that character to say something like that is something, but for it to break the other person's heart so thoroughly that then she has to get up, cross the room and comfort the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it all feels right is kind of a miracle and is an amazing thing. And the other bit, of course, that I love that absolutely is in the novel is in the final analysis when one of our characters learned all these tough and painful lessons. And she's, talking about what she should or shouldn't have done. They're out for a walk or whatever. And Eleanor says to Marianne, we don't seriously mean to compare your conduct with Willoughby's, this guy she had this huge crush on. And she says, no, I compare them with what they ought to have been. I compare them with yours. And Marianne just says that, like, I figured it out.
Yeah.
But you see it land with Eleanor. You see how suddenly this burdensome, naggy, pain in the ass older sister is her whole essence. It's been appreciated in this moment. And the power of that is sensational. It's just really, really amazing. And I can't tell you, the whole film is this perfect collection of these moments that all stick and land, like just every second of it. It's a near perfect movie.
I agree with you 100%. It has one of my two all-time most favorite acting moments. Both happen to be by Emma Thompson, and it's such a nothing moment. So they get to this new house, which by our standards is fabulous. By their standards is basically a tent.
Yeah.
And all the women are sobbing except for Eleanor because she's got to be.
Right. They've all run to their rooms and slammed the doors.
She sits down on the stairs with a cup of tea. The camera is behind her.
Meant to comfort her sister.
And it is one of the most profound acting moments.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just acting
every time because you feel the weight. Yeah,
Emma
you just
conceived
feel the
of that
weight
moment.
of that entire story on her.
Yep.
It's incredible. She is just so exquisite in that movie. I mean, there isn't a character in that I think is miscast, but she is truly. I don't care that she's too old to play the role. I don't care that she didn't want to play her. She is just off the chart.
Yeah, for someone who reluctantly stepped in because was like, okay, well, we need somebody with star power. She had just come off an Academy Award nomination and stuff, and so it's like, okay, I'll do it. She absolutely, just crushes every moment.
She is, and it's an actorly role because Emma's not really much anything like Eleanor. She embodies her, but that isn't her. And the fact that she advocates for her so strongly that we all just, it's really amazing. And then just from top to bottom, Hugh Grant is perfect in it. Obviously, Alan Rickman, the late Alan Rickman, is amazing in it. Alan Rickman had been, just because he was so good in his screen debut in Die Hard, he'd just been offered villain after villain after villain in these Hollywood movies. And he basically had to just take the best ones he could. It wasn't like there were other roles out there for him.
Right.
Yeah.
He played a bunch of other weird things and odd stuff that didn't hit because it wasn't any good, because he was just trying to do something different. But the first time you see the soul of that man on screen is in Sense and Sensibility. And it's stunning change because this guy is night and day different from the person we're used to seeing him portray.
There's no Hans Gruber that shows up in
but I would also say that because of the popularity of Hans Gruber and his performance of that, I think his casting is they play that up a little bit. Those first few times we meet Colonel Brandon.
Yeah, who are you?
We're supposed to there's our villain. There's the jerk of the piece, and then Greg Wise comes on, and you're like, so it is this great juxtaposition.
I carry the sonnets with me.
Between Willoughby and Colonel Brandon.
Greg Wise is great too. He's a guy that gets knocked for being Mr. Emma Thompson pretty much everything he does these days. He's a really good actor, and he's really fantastic in Sense and Sensibility.
Yes.
And also he
really is Willoughby, and his I've seen Sense done a few different times, and Greg's breakdown when he has to go away or whatever, like his inability to even get a word out.
Yeah,
that's nobody else has done it like that. Everybody else plays the guy a little slimier than even the evidence of the story sort of suggests that he is. Greg doesn't let you in on any of that. Yeah. He's Willoughby all the way. He's Team Willoughby all the way, and it makes a difference in the movie, I think. So,
and I do. I also love. I always come away with it just really, aside from the obvious people who are amazing in it and Ang Lee's direction of it, but Hugh Laurie and Imelda Staunton, with
Emma Thompson. That's like us doing a movie together.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm in a movie. Let me bring all my college friends with me. Basically, is what it was.
It was like get everyone from Peter's friends to come on and make an appearance in here. And Hugh Laurie is so funny.
So funny.
And again, I can't stress enough, I'm no fan of Peter's friends, but that's literally that's literally the group that went to Cambridge together and were in the theater arts together at Cambridge. That all those people, Branna accepted. That was Emma's class. Branna didn't go to Cambridge, but
can you imagine showing
Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and Imelda Staunton and Tony Slattery all in school with you.
Yep.
Emma Thompson, stunning.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
And there's only one other lady and she didn't go into acting. She's like a doctor or something. And she was brilliant.
What a slacker. What a slug.
She just decided not, but you go back and watch their stuff they did together. She's brilliant. So
we've gushed about this. Let's quickly talk about, quickly talk about the 2008 miniseries. Again, this is another Andrew Davies adaptation. I must admit, I have not seen this one.
I watched this last night so that I could talk about it, and I'm thrilled that I did. It was great. It's
there
great.
There are lots and lots of things about it. I think the mother is beautiful. What's her name? You know, she's a great actor.
Not Dan Stevens. That's not the one I wanted to click on.
I love Dan Stevens.
Dan's great in
it. Yeah. No, I love Dan Stevens, but
although entirely too conventionally beefcakey for Edward, but he's still. It's a great performance. He still gets the guy, which is I appreciate. The twerpy kid who plays Willoughby, I find Dominic Cooper.
Yeah, that's a disappointing cast. And I will say
because he really does come in as a conventional double-crossing villain.
It's kind of a Guido.
Yeah, exactly. It's too bad.
It
isn't just him. It's that he doesn't. Unlike Dan, who's also kind of miscast a little bit, he doesn't find his way in it. It's right. It's too bad. It does an okay job, but it's not the same.
Janet McTeer is
Janet McTeer.
Yeah. I thought what was really interesting when I rewatched this that I had not remembered is how much more action is built into it. I mean, that's a relative term when you're thinking about action movies.
Jane Austen.
No, but I got to see, I was all excited. I wrote to you guys about it. I'm like, I get to finally see the duel, which is absolutely not a part of the 95 Sense and Sensibility.
And makes no sense in the context of a Jane Austen novel. I mean,
but it's in the novel.
No, it's not.
It isn't.
No, unless I just somehow missed it. I don't think so.
No, it's in the novel because I just watched Emma Thompson complaining that she had to cut it out of her version of the movie.
Well, I have to go back and reread
it. And it was the number one thing people complained about because they loved the duel.
You know what?
The movie, there's not a lot of context for it either. You get that there's tension between these guys, but why are they sword fighting all of a sudden?
Right.
Like you have to learn everything later. So the movie plays it fairly cleverly, but I have it from Emma Thompson's mouth that it is in the novel. So I feel like I don't want to argue with you about it. But
I will admit, as much as I love the Emma Thompson movie, I don't love this novel. So I've probably only read it twice. And I probably haven't read it in.
Well, it is a list of adaptations, folks. Or we'd have just talked about Persuasion the whole time.
The whole time.
Yeah. Persuasion deep dive. Maybe that'll be in the future. We'll have to get some actual requests for that though before we do it.
I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
It's great. Hattie McDaniel plays Eleanor in it. She's a Hattie
McDaniel. That's her name.
Hattie McDaniel. Yeah.
She has the same name as the woman who played Mammy in Gone with the Wind.
Really?
No, that's Hattie Morahan.
Oh, Morahan. Yeah. Sorry.
That seems unlikely to me.
I don't even Gone with the Wind. I don't even know. So I guess that's just something I absorbed without knowing it. I do that all the time. I mix up names. Sorry, Hattie.
No, it's fine. I just couldn't believe that they had the same name.
Hattie Morahan. Well, either way, I know that actor. She's got big bug eyes, and she uses them to great effect in everything she's in. She keeps it to a minimum in Sense and Sensibility, which is appreciated, but they still show up in a few places that are actually pretty great. And
I could not get on board with the actress who plays Marianne. I can't.
I liked her. She was subtler, which I don't know is helpful.
Oh man, that girl's teeth were so bad I couldn't get past them. I know. I'm just gonna pull that card.
The teeth, really? Boo.
Come on. When she and Willoughby are at the estate he's going to inherit and she's in the window with her
all single ladies with bad teeth, PM me. It's cool. I'm down. Don't listen to Dayna.
I'm sorry. We
all have our things, it's cool.
I got stuff I don't like about me too, but her teeth are bad. Bad. Distracting. I
don't remember. Who's that actor, Joel? Can you tell us who plays Marianne in this version of it?
Yes. Give me when I was looking up the duel. In this version, it is. We're talking about. I'm sorry. You're asking about
Marianne.
Marianne. Who plays Marianne in this? It is Charity Wakefield.
Okay.
Charity, not good toothed Wakefield.
There you go.
That's her boxing name.
I like them in it, but I do feel like I feel like it couldn't it's got more stuff in it, which I like, because there's stuff from Sense and Sensibility that I hadn't experienced before, so I really love that. I knew where the story was going, so I was feeling for everybody, so that wasn't a problem. I thought it was a good adaptation. It suffered by comparison. There are these magical moments that I've had 25 years to fall in love with, and when I didn't feel the same way when they passed by, I just was like, I was I was strung along well enough, but I was discombobulated by that. So, but I thought it was pretty great, actually. I don't want to diss on it. It's neat.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
I don't dislike it either.
Yeah, but it's tough.
It's tough when the 95 version is so good.
Yeah.
Speaking of 1995.
Are we really doing that first? I thought we have to do that first.
Yeah, we have to do that one first. Let's
because we can't enter into a discussion of this particular adaptations without speaking of the. I thought that through. I'm just reminding myself.
And we mentioned it at the.
Welcome back to the show, everybody.
Dayna mentioned it at the outset as this was her gateway drug to Jane Austen and
gateway drug.
The Jane and it was of course the story of course is Pride and Prejudice. I will say my son is his name he's Bennett because of the Bennett family in Pride and Prejudice.
Really?
Yeah. That's why we.
Wow.
That's where we.
That is a deep commitment.
Yeah. Well,
I should say.
There's a longer, dumber story, but ultimately it came around and we're like, it matches the family name of one of our favorite stories. And so we're like, let's do it.
Nice.
But Pride and Prejudice, the 1995 adaptation of it is it's pretty bonkers. It's pretty amazing. And
also Andrew Davies again.
And
right?
again, if this is an Andrew Davies, I believe this was the first of the Andrew Davies. Why can't I find it?
He's amazing. He's done Dickens. He's adapted War and Peace into a watchable thing. I mean, he's
astonishing.
With respect to our dear friend Jeffrey Hatcher, who's really good at this too, Andrew Davies really is the best adapter of Western literature for the screen. Perhaps ever, but certainly working now, I have to say.
Yeah.
And his signature is all over this. He lets this one be. He's got time. Again, he's got 4 hours and change here to get it all in there. And it's all there. Everything that you read, right? Every little thing that people who were Austen fans up until this point, like it's everything they thought about and envisioned, like it's all in it.
Yeah.
And that's tough to beat. But what it has that none of these, nothing ever, I just don't think it's going to be beat. What it has at the heart of it is this sort of perfect period romantic leading man who is embodied by sort of this exact perfect coming of this guy who was always meant to play this role and was just young enough to smolder in it and yet it was a good enough, seasoned enough actor to make all kinds of excellent choices and was still just super attractive and everything else you want him to be. Like it's just, I feel really bad for the guy I'm going to talk about in a few minutes because it's just no way that
he's the bar by which all other,
but
I'm sorry, say again.
I said who we're going to talk about was also great, but it's like,
but you
cannot compete.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just in your Pride and Prejudice adaptations. You just can't really across the board.
No.
I don't want to say for every period drama ever, but there's only a couple of guys in the history of this genre over this period, this 25 period of time, which has been ripe with these sorts of things. There've been several amazing ones.
Mm-hmm.
And he just is he's the top of the king of the mountain, top of the pile, everything about Colin Firth and the 95 Pride Prejudice.
And he turned it down.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was initially vetted and somebody on the casting side said, absolutely not. And then they talked that person into it, and they reached out to him, and he said, absolutely not.
No, screw
and
you.
They reached out again. And I mean, they really had to work on him. Kind of a Clark Gable playing Rhett Butler moment, just like, how do I take on this?
Except Colin Firth, he was a known entity, but he wasn't like some big star or anything either.
No,
like,
but when you have
it helped that he wasn't, because he was unknown enough that he was this guy to you. You didn't imagine him in his other roles the way we do now.
I think in literature there are three, and I could easily be debunked on this, but there are three major characters. You have Rhett Butler from Gone with the Wind, you have Theodore Lawrence from Little Women, and you have Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. And I think to take on any of those three characters would be sort of that, like, oh, please don't put that entire mountain on my shoulders. And I think, you know, it's very rare that they get it right. And Colin Firth is just absolutely right.
Right.
Amazing.
Colin Firth is so good in this version of Pride and Prejudice that when the role comes up again in Bridget Jones's Diary, it's literally all he has to do is appear on screen, and all of the work is done for the entire film. Because of the work he did in the 95 miniseries. It's a brilliant little bit of kismet that he played it, you know, he was able to play it again. But the aforementioned Jennifer Ely, who really is the story and has to carry it in a way that Colin doesn't have to. Yeah, and she's stunning. She's so amazingly lovely. I love her.
Do you know who her mother is?
Ooh.
Her mother
Ely?
plays the aunt in the Tom Harper, whatever his name is, Spider-Man movies.
Marissa Tomei.
Okay, I'm on the wrong Spider-Man. Maybe Tobey Maguire.
Tom Hooper, Sally Field. She's Spider-Man's aunt. Then in the early, Rosemary Harris.
Rosemary Harris. That is Jennifer Ely's mother.
So the Tobey Maguire ones. You do not know your Spider-Man. You're like, that's 4 Spider-Men ago, Dayna.
Yeah, sorry. Who's Spider-Man in her version? Tobey Maguire?
Tobey Maguire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Rosemary and Tobey Maguire. It'll be okay. Once the multiverse opens up, they all become one thing.
Yeah, it'll all work out.
It'll all work out.
Great, thanks.
Rosemary Harris is great. I just saw her in something different the other day, and she was a battle axe in it, and it was really fun. I don't remember what it was. She's a good actor.
Jennifer Ely is just amazing. I mean, Elizabeth Bennet is a hard character because she's so conventionally disliked by her era, but we resonate so strongly with her today. And you have to figure out how to not play into the easy part of modern audiences appreciating her so that you lose the authenticity of the era, which is incredible.
She does it is amazing. Yeah. And her sort of natural, it's hard to explain it, but Jennifer Ely just cast against type really in that role. So, but that's to the benefit of the character too, because her natural kindness and stuff that kind of exists between the cracks of the dialogue and everything really, really plays great in the movie. That's also really, really tough to top. She's incredible in it. And the whole family, you get to spend all this time with them. I still get the two sisters mixed up until one of them runs away with somebody. I'm like, which one's
Kitty
the one that...
And Mary, Kitty, who's the one that marries Wickham?
If you hadn't said Kitty first, I'd remember, but I can't. Now I'm getting them mixed up again.
Oh my gosh.
Mary and Lydia.
No, not Mary.
Lydia.
Oh, Lydia. How could we forget? How could we forget?
Yeah.
No, Mary, poor Mary. They're all brought to life really convincingly and really wonderfully, and the I also really like just the pastoral nature of the story. I have to say, the longer the miniseries Sense and Sensibility gets this right too. When they move to the cottage, you really feel like, whoa, they're going to have to make this work somehow. It's still kind of a nice house, but there's no sense of you just moved from a giant house to a smaller, lovely house. You moved into this whole different culture, and everything's going to be different now. And that had a real sense of place to it that I really appreciated.
Yep.
This too has this, there's like always a duck somewhere. There's always something. This is not an easy thing to do when you're shooting a miniseries. It's not a feature film. So to have stuff happening everywhere and to have everything populated with servants or whoever, farmers, it just love that it gets all that atmosphere right. It really works well in its favor, I think.
I agree, but I will say, to me, just hopping forward, if we're going to hop around.
We can go for it.
I actually think that the most successful element to the Keira Knightley, Matthew McFadden version is that it's even more pastoral, and it's so, when she's on that swing spinning and all the seasons pass, I mean, that is the ultimate representation of arranging matches and just the tedium of that life. So on one hand,
and it's no mistake that when the swing stops, she's looking at her friend,
absolutely,
who's run out of time.
Yes, absolutely.
And that whole conversation is a really, really powerful conversation.
Beautiful, when she crosses that little moat and there's a pig in the house and all of that. I love how sort of messy the new Pride and Prejudice is. That scene where Mrs. Bennet's is on the couch asleep with the book on her face, and they find out that the gentlemen have come and they shove everything under the couch. And I love that moment because it humanizes them. I don't care if it's 1817 or 2017. We all sometimes have a messy house and somebody unexpectedly drops by.
The brilliance of Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice is that it doesn't have the luxury. It's half as the length, so it doesn't have the luxury of having all these moments in it. So every little signature character thing has to pay off.
Yep.
And they do. They really they do almost without question. You get to know everybody, Lydia and Kitty aside. Although even you kind of get the difference. Or at least you do when you have to.
When it matters. Yeah.
When it becomes important, you get it.
In the book, too.
When I first watched that movie, I thought, did they combine these two into one person in the longer version? Nope. They wouldn't do that. No, it was just me. I combined them into one person until one of them became consequential, and then I forgot about the other one altogether.
Yeah.
Carrie Mulligan plays Kitty in Joe Wright, and she's not forgettable.
Yeah.
Nope. And it's why she's not. Everything she knows when she's on camera, she doesn't get to do a lot. So every time she gets to do something,
it matters.
Magic. Yeah. And you can't forget about her. So that I just forgot about the other poor Kitty. Sorry, whoever you are. Well,
she's even more inconsequential in a longer version, which is super interesting. That
it is. Sure.
Twice the length. Yeah.
And from an anthropological study, that is an interesting idea. But so I adore it. There's a lot of things I like better about it. I like Keira as opposed to Jennifer Ely, who really is sort of definitive now, but they all kind of are in that 95 version. But that aside, Keira brings the Katharine Hepburn like movie star power to the thing. You know what I mean? She really, really does have that. And Joe Wright only gave her one rule. He said, you can't pout ever.
Thank God.
Because that's all Keira does in all these movies, especially the big Hollywood ones. He said, if I see you doing that, I'm going to stop everything. I'm going to yell at you in front of everybody. Don't do it. Part of your work in preparation for this role is you can't do that. And of course, Joe took off one day because some family thing, and one of the producers was shooting that day, and she got one in. So there is a pout in the movie, which he'll be happy to point out to you, that he did not approve of or sanction, but that was in every take, and he had to put it in the movie. So I just think that's really funny. So that shorter version of the movie needs that. It really does need. You can't get to know her the way you get to know a person. You have to you got to hit the ground running.
Yep.
And McFadden, again, in a lot of ways I prefer him too. He's because he's a really attractive guy. He's really sort of wonderful. I mean, there's things about him that he's well cast. He's not Colin Firth.
No.
So whatever the magic isn't necessarily there. But what is there is the pathos of the character is super on his sleeve. Like what he's really going through you get, I think, a little bit more with Colin, who remains this mysterious, magical man throughout the whole
100%.
thing.
When he proposes to her, when Matthew McFadden proposes to her, it is so real. When he can't even get out, I love you. It takes him like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
It is wrenching. It's
even when he thinks it's going to work out, he still can't
incredible.
really say it because he's just not a guy who says stuff like that.
What
does she say? He says, "Can I give you a ride back into town or whatever?" When she's suddenly at his estate.
Right. Yep.
She's like, "No, I prefer to walk." And he says, "No, I know." we all know what that means. You crazy kids. It's going to work out for you guys. Well, they don't know it yet.
No.
Yeah.
That's the delight of it. Emma Thompson consulted on that film too. Like, they gave it to her and said,
"Oh, I didn't know that."
Yeah, do some stuff with this. We're working on this. Any ideas you have? She only had 3 ideas, but my favorite idea of hers was that when they find out Lydia's run off and she comes in to tell them the news and then starts crying again, it goes back behind the little divider and then comes back again, composes herself and says that that's Emma Thompson, right? Isn't it? Now that you know?
Yeah.
That's her all over. Mm-hmm. So that's the one that sticks with me because yes, of course you wrote that.
Because it's got that incredible energy.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's hilarious, and yet there's nothing lost in the drama of what's happening. Yep. Even though what's happening to our minds in modern audiences' lives doesn't that big a deal, right? It's going to bring down the whole family. That can't be. Like even today, I still like it's just one of them. Like the others will be all right, right?
They will not, Ryan.
No, the movie lands that idea. I get it. Judi Dench. That is the one thing I do definitively like better. The confrontation scene between Judi Dench and Keira Knightley is electric.
Yes,
it's the same word for word in both movies, but in that second movie, whew.
Judi Dench is just. I mean,
yeah, she's pretty good. I think she's gonna. I think she's
got
a. I know it's a little late in her career, but I think she's got some. I think she's got legs. I think she's.
But she plays again. She's brilliant. So she doesn't just play the mean. I'm sticking it to the hero thing.
Well, she's play her like Queen Victoria.
She's terrified of what's happening here. Her whole world's been blown up, and you can see it all over her face, even though she's not saying it. And Kira's. Belongs in the room with that kind of talent, and that just is awesome. It's just really exciting to see, a couple of titans like that at each other. I love that scene.
I love that.
So
scene too.
it's lovable. They both really are lovable in their own way.
How do you feel about Donald Sutherland in it?
He's okay. Especially because you believe him as the pushover that he is.
I can't figure out why they cast Donald Sutherland.
He's got a long history of playing British people in British movies. Remember, Donald Sutherland's Canadian, and he lived in England in the late 70s and early 80s.
Hey, I mean, I don't think he's bad in it. I don't even dislike. He's fine in it. It's such an odd choice to me to say, well, we're going to take this one outlier. Because there are no 60-year-old men anywhere in England to play it. It's just an interesting choice to me.
Well, Jenna Malone's American too, plays Lydia.
Yeah, that could be part of the producing.
Really?
Saying Jenna Malone is she's one of us. But yeah, I mean, and that also just could come from the.
I think that's all I can think of, but still, there's a couple of them.
I'm looking at them, and I don't. At least. To my eye, I don't see any other Americans in there.
I think it's all, but
yeah,
he's not American. He's Canadian. That's important.
I'm sorry.
He's a Canadian.
Did you not hear? I said North
British
American.
people with Sean Connery.
North American. I said North American. I must have cut out when I said the North. Yeah.
Not to get too inside baseball, but
but you're right. It makes a difference. It absolutely.
You can be a Canadian and go live and work in England rather easily. You cannot be an American and just decide you're going to go over there. The amount of hoops you got to go through, because the amount of hoops you got to go through in reverse are extensive and intense.
The hoops in reverse are bonkers.
Well, and they respond that way. As a Canadian, English people can move to Canada and just say, I'm Canadian now. And it really is pretty much as simple as that.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So when you see an American expatriate like Gillian Armstrong or Gillian Anderson, mixing up my Gillians, somebody, an American who just is suddenly in Britain all the time. That's a really unusual thing.
I thought Gillian Anderson was born in England.
Was she? She was born in like Nebraska or something.
Joel?
Give me a moment. Give me a moment. It is a testament to what a great story it is that you can add zombies to it and it almost still works.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, she
zombies
was.
And Japanese dojos. Don't forget the dojos.
Yeah, the dojos.
As long as there are no ninjas.
She was born in. Gillian Anderson was born in Chicago, but I'm looking to see if she had any other roots. Oh, but she grew up in London. She was born in Chicago, grew up in London and Grand Rapids, Michigan. So she has.
So there's more of a connection there than just I want to live in England. I'm going home to England was what she was doing. Still, it's rare. But with Canadians, not so much so. That's the Donald Sutherland thing. He's a very, very popular actor in England.
Well, like I said, I don't dislike him. It's just a funny casting to me. But I will concede to your point. And
that would be nothing if you really liked him. I have to admit, I don't really believe that anyone can deserve you, But it seems I'm overruled. Like his performance in those moments is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes.
But better, I think. Better, I think, is he makes some really poor choices on behalf of his family throughout the movie. Even though he's a very kind-hearted guy, he's not really ruthless enough to deal with these. Once these high society people come into his life, he just thinks it's gonna kind of work out, and it doesn't.
Yeah,
it does, but it almost doesn't. I mean, it really is almost catastrophic. She sits there and tells him, "You cannot let her go. That she will do." Even Elizabeth doesn't. She doesn't take it to the extreme of what actually happens, but she just knows it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah,
and I'll never hear the end of it if we just doesn't go. Like he just,
it's really like he can't be bothered to be disturbed. So just let it go because I have a book to read.
Right.
Yeah.
He captures that, I think, really nicely.
I also think that mindset of, well, this is how I will live until I die. And then I'm sorry, you're kind of on your own. That's pretty prevalent in a lot of these stories. I think one of the best lines.
That's not his life philosophy. That's just the reality of his existence. And it's how he gets from day to day. It's very clear when you watch it.
One of my favorite lines that shows up, I think, in both versions is when he says, "Fancy, my dear, perhaps I'll outlive you," because she's always lamenting about how they're all going to be thrown out of the house. And that's his solution. Well, maybe you'll die first. That's not really a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of feels like it always has felt to me like I have made all sorts of bad choices and I can't make any more choices because whichever one I make is going to be the wrong one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so therefore I'm going to continually remove myself.
Yeah. Well, and his issues with his wife and her mouth and everything, like he just can't. That's not he's lived long enough to know that's not a solvable thing for him. So he just keeps his head down and just tries to get through it all. He's not we're talking about him like he's kind of a terrible person, but it isn't. Yeah, he's this loving, kind of wonderful father that a brood like that is kind of lucky to have. But he is not ruthless enough for the age. Truly, he isn't. And it does end up making a difference when marrying the lords and ladies, when what you have is your good name. That's what you have to trade off of, and you just gotta make the most of it, man. And he kind of doesn't get that, which is too bad. Yeah. But it ends up being good for our hero. In the end, it's a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. All right, so that is our list of our competing multiple lists, our top
not
5, but
we're
sort of not really.
For the most part.
But we wanted to. We didn't. I don't think we gave any short shrift to some of these. When you have an author like Jane Austen, there are multiple adaptations of it. It's like if we were to do when we start doing a Shakespeare show where there's going to be multiple adaptations that we're going to have to look at.
And the lesson is, I have what I feel is a definitive Sense and Sensibility and a definitive Persuasion. And just this past few weeks, I've watched the other ones, which I haven't watched, because when I sit down to watch that story, if I'm going to take the time, I want to watch the thing that I love.
Yeah.
I made myself watch those, and the lesson is they're great. Like, those are all pretty good. Even the Mansfield Parks, which aren't good, compare rather favorably to one another. They're just a little different in a few different ways. So it's kind of like you can't lose in a way. We have a hard time finding a bad one.
Yeah, well, some ones that didn't make the list, that are, we were gonna, if we we were gonna talk about maybe Becoming Jane, which is not a Jane.
Becoming Jane, spectacular. Of course, it's not a Jane Austen.
It's not an adaptation, but it is. It's
there are a lot of Jane Austen adjacent type projects out there, some of which are awesome, and Becoming Jane might be my favorite.
Yeah,
and I'll just say quickly why that is, Joel. I know you wanted to breeze through this, but
that's okay.
Becoming Jane is great because it first of all, we don't know any of this story of her life because it's just not available to us, but we do know some facts about the people around her. Yeah, there you go. We just, certain things. So they've taken these things they know and they've crafted this Jane Austen-esque forbidden romance story out of it, which really follows all the tropes and has all the side players and all the things that we're used to watching in these stories. Mm-hmm. But it has unlike Jane, who really let the last domino fall in just about all of her stories, this thing just doesn't do that. This thing brings the harsh reality of the times to your door, and it does it in the most tragic imaginable way, because it does it over a thing that, again, we as people living on the earth today can't possibly relate to. Well, the guy's a lawyer, right? Surely gets a job somewhere and this will be fine and people won't starve. That's probably not true.
Yeah. And what's so interesting about that is that character and all of the details about him are 100% real. They were.
And Laurie Fox's character as well. The guy, the young guy from her neighborhood that she really was matched with theoretically by all the people in her life.
Yep.
From when they were kids.
I mean, that's the only piece that is unverifiable is whether or not they actually ever considered eloping. Otherwise, all of it is true. Yeah. So that's really interesting then. I mean, he even named his daughter Jane. So
and Jane and her sisters, true loves. There's that incredible tag at the end of the movie, and neither of them ever married. Becoming Jane it's the next best thing to a Jane Austen adaptation if you're going to sit down and watch a theatrical film, without question.
And other Austen adjacent properties, Sanditon, and we have Death Comes to Pemberley.
I was the only one here who thought that was okay.
I didn't dislike it. I thought it was interesting that Cassandra from Becoming Jane plays Elizabeth Darcy in Death Comes to Pemberley. I liked that.
A little interesting. And Matthew Good, right? Matthew Good, not Dan.
Right.
I get them mixed up sometimes, but they're not the same.
And then
Dan Stevens and Matthew Good are not the same guy, but they are they're pretty much the same dude.
They're the Lydia of their genre.
Yeah.
Fitzwilliam Darcy Gentleman. I don't know.
All right, Dana, you got 2 minutes.
All right, so
what's the pitch?
It's a trilogy of books by a woman named Pamela Aden, and it is Pride and Prejudice told entirely from his viewpoint. So it's really interesting. He's got this kind of snarky butler who serves him. He's not a butler. He's this groomsman who serves him, and they go on this incredible, the middle book is him trying to get rid of Elizabeth out of his mind because she refuses him at the end of the first book. And in the second one, he goes to this house party and he's determined to fall in love. And that's where you really see a lot of this Northanger Abbey stuff. There's all this weird, crazy mysticism. The Irish do not fare very well. They're totally crazy in it. And then, then it's him seeing her at Lady Catherine's house. And it's so delightful. I find myself repeatedly wishing that I could watch Pride and Prejudice told like this. A merge of both Jane Austen.
Maybe somebody will do it. Maybe BBC will do it. They'll need to do
it would be very cool.
They'll need to do a miniseries, but it's been my experience of late, if these things come out, if they're any good or popular, they do get made into films.
Yeah, it's a very fun series.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, excellent. Is there any other Jane Austen stuff that
there's a bunch more, but
anyone that we want to mention?
I got my pet favorite in, she got hers, so we're covered.
And I got Clueless. So
we talked about Clueless.
No, I'm fine with that.
We didn't talk about the zombies much, but
no, and that's okay. I really did enjoy reading Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I thought it was a very fun.
That's an interesting distinction. I haven't heard that before, but you both agree that it was okay read, but not
it was a silly fun. It was a silly fun read. It relies, I think, heavily on knowing the story beforehand.
Oh,
so that's how the humor comes through. And then the movie was just tragic, though.
I did not.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. All right. So, do you have a wonderful Jane Austen adaptation that we did not talk about? You, of course, can reach out to us at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook.
Got any other period romances you want me and Dayna to talk about on future shows?
That's true. Yeah,
do it.
And
there are still so many more. There's North and South, isn't there, Dayna?
There is North and South, and there's like Thomas Hardy novels, and there's Bronte novels.
There's a lot where this came from, so we're going to have you back. Don't worry.
So this will be, we'll get used to the amazing, look kind of purpley room and lamp behind Dayna.
Because I got to say, Joel, I come into these conversations like the ladies are talking online or whatever, and I try and inject myself into them. Oh yeah, and this and that every time, and I don't think it's because it's online. I think it's because I'm a guy. Every time I'm not taken seriously, they think I'm making fun of them or something. Like I can't actually talk about this stuff with people. It's not super cool for somebody like me to be into romance costume dramas. It's just I would agree with that. They are an absolute favorite genre of mine, without question. It is something that as a guy, it is something that is often scoffed at. It's often used as a punchline. I mean, and so. But the worst thing is that even the people who love them along with you don't really think you're interloping on them. Well, I think that by trying to, there's no easy way in to talk about this stuff. So, well, I think Dayna, maybe there's a little bit like made one of my dreams come true, in that we got to really. Yeah, talk about this substantively. I got to think that when women are reading something and they feel themselves connecting to strong women characters, there's a great sense of ownership. And they don't really want guys hoarding in on that. I get it. So I get it, but I do want to be invited to the tea party every once in a while.
Come anytime.
I loves me the Bennett family.
I call Dr. Mary because of Jane Austen.
Oh, there you go.
Much to his disappointment, but I wrote a whole blog post about it. I mean, come on, he's taken me to her home. I just how could I possibly call him Maz when I could call him Dr. Mary? It's just there's no topping it. Sure,
there's that.
And he gets to have it all, right? He's Dr. Andrew Maz Mary, right?
Mary, yeah, lots
of in there.
Yep.
And living in the gorgeous area of Fargo.
Bucolic, Fargo, North Dakota.
Bucolic, Fargo.
Yeah.
All right. Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram. The Movie Show Joel and Ryan page on YouTube, which if you are watching this, you're already there, so you might as well just go down, hit subscribe, and give us a like. So thank you all so much for joining us. Dayna, love you so much. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.